Fresh from my latest gig with the Edgewood Bible Church worship team yesterday, we launch, we sail, we face plant into another week here on the Hard Starboard Radio Network and blogtalkradio.com/HSR Network. I am your host, Jasmius, your ruler, your benevolent despot, and your fountain rabbi of conservatism, constitutionalism, Christianity, and common sense. 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific. Guest call-in number 646-478-5068. Email address jasmius@comcast.net. Chat room is open. And, well, as I look out my blogcasting window, it's not raining at the moment, but it may as well be. It may as well be, ladies and gentlemen. Actually, in most of the leaves in my neck of the woods here, and my little patch of the planet Earth, Sol 3, if you will, I haven't changed colors yet. Yeah, they still got leaves and they're still green. Although that'll probably inexorably be changing here in the next month. We've had kind of an Indian summer here, but the Indians have been herded off to the reservation, so to speak. Well, I don't know. I mean, it's in the 50s today. It's been in the 60s most of this month of October. So, and even at night, it hasn't gotten much below the mid 40s. So, you know, if this is as bad as this particular winter gets, I won't be complaining. I haven't really even had to turn on the heat yet, which my energy bill, my electricity bill will not be complaining about that either, ladies and gentlemen. Now, at the main page at blogtalkradio.com/HSR Network, there are over 7 years worth of podcasts for your downloading pleasure, your education, edification, enlightenment, entertainment, enjoyment, and ecstasy in all your life's endeavors. There's also a follow button for you to click to keep up with what we're doing. Get show times, show schedule, and of course it is pretty regular. 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific, Monday through Friday. Plus the Hard Starboard Weekend, or Hard Starboard Radio Weekend, excuse me, podcast, which airs on Sundays, 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific. Our old time slot, day and time when we were a weekly program instead of the daily program that we are now. And there's also the possibility that by clicking on the follow button, in addition to padding my membership numbers and stroking my ego uncontrollably, that you might put Hard Starboard Radio on the main page at blogtalkradio.com as a featured podcast right alongside another production of the Hard Starboard Radio Network, Featured American Daily Review. That airs Saturdays, 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific at blogtalkradio.com/American Daily Review, where there are over 5 years worth of podcasts for your downloading revelry. It is the kickoff of the Saturday afternoon extravaganza, a 3-hour program on 2 venues, 1 day a week. One day soon to be a 3-hour program on 1 venue, 5 days a week, plus replays on weekends as befits a syndicated radio program. In the first hour, I'm joined by Mr. Constitution himself, the author now of 2 books, 25 Myths of the United States Constitution, and just came out about a week ago, The Basic Constitution, of which I was one of the editors. I am honored to be able to say. That, of course, being Douglas V. Gibbs, author, public speaker, constitutional lecturer, constitutional teacher, AM radio host, soon to be syndicated radio host in the not-too-distant future. And a lot of other things that will, in the very near future, become paying propositions for us both. And who knows how many other people. And he joins me in the first hour of American Daily Review, and we discuss, break down, and analyze the big stories of the week, all except 1 and 2, usually, although the last couple of weeks, we've gone through all of them on American Daily Review just to make sure that we would have time to do so. And it just underscores why we need to be on the air 5 days a week for 3 hours a day. We need 15 hours. 1 hour a week is not nearly enough. Or even the 3 of the Saturday afternoon extravaganza, not nearly enough. And you can tell by how we have to jump up and down to cram all of it into 3 hours, much less the one of the third hour of the Saturday afternoon extravaganza, which I'll get to in a moment. Now, I always want to say story number 2. In hour number 2, I'm joined by my good, close personal friend of online fame, dating back to the old CompuServe Information Service on the Rush H. Limbaugh section of the Old Issues Forum. I'm speaking, of course, of my good, close personal friend from the state of Indiana, Jennifer. And we just kind of talk, shoot the breeze, have a nice neighborly conversation over the virtual back fence. It kind of distinguishes hour number 2 from hour number 1, which is kind of the idea. Dial down the intensity. It's kind of like halftime at a football game. Although we're much more interesting and entertaining to listen to than a high school marching band. And I say that as somebody who was in a high school marching band once, folks, so I can say that. And then at the top of the third hour of the Saturday afternoon extravaganza, 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific, in case you weren't keeping track, we switch venues from blogtalkradio.com/American Daily Review to KCAAradio.com globally, KCAA AM 1050, FM 106.7, the Inland Talk Express, where no listener is left behind, locally in the Southern California Inland Empire area, specifically San Bernardino, La Belinda, California, for the flagship program of the Saturday afternoon extravaganza, Constitution Radio with this man. Now, for those of you watching on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/user/hardstarboardradio, providing that today's program, today's podcast is the most listened to of this week, in which case you're watching this a week from now, Mr. Gibbs's entrance music is playing on the live podcast as we speak. So, just so you know what's going on, please subscribe, of course, to youtube.com/user/hardstarboardradio, and also our other YouTube channel, youtube.com/user/American Daily Review 2, that's the number 2, where each and every Saturday afternoon extravaganza is uploaded, usually by Sunday evening. It wasn't last night because my broadcasting computer blue screen, so I have to upload it all over again. But just so you're aware, youtube.com/user/American Daily Review for the Saturday afternoon extravaganza, and youtube.com/user/hardstarboardradio for the most listened to Hard Starboard Radio podcast of the preceding week. Yes, Constitution Radio, Douglas V. Gibbs. Featuring, of course, Mr. Gibbs, Mr. Constitution himself, me, of course, Alex Ferguson of ConservativeCandidate.com, and one of the engineers, Joe. There is almost always a top-tier guest, whether national, regional, or local. There is the Book of the Week. There is the Constitution Quest Question of the Week, taken from the game Constitution Quest. And, of course, that game is available at many outlets, including ConstitutionQuest.com, where through this following Sunday, you only have a week left to take advantage of this, folks, so do not miss it. If you don't have a copy of Constitution Quest, the board game, you go to ConstitutionQuest.com, you put the discount code DOUG, D-O-U-G, in the discount field. When you make your purchase, you get 20% off the price of the game. Hell of a deal. Hell of a deal. Don't miss it. Learn the Constitution at the same time. I mean, I think we all win. And then, of course, stories 2 and 1, usually, of the big stories of the week. It's it's the local show with the global footprint. It is the culmination of the Saturday afternoon extravaganza, which begins, once again, let me emphasize it, high noon Pacific time, 3 p.m. Eastern, with American Daily Review at blogtalkradio.com/American Daily Review. Now, while working several jobs over the past decade, Douglas Gibbs pursued a calling, learning the Constitution of the United States. He objectively researched, dissected, and obtained illumination from each and every word in that historic document. This calling led Doug into internet radio, the political pistachio, radio revolution, at blogtalkradio.com/political pistachio, which is now the current home of Constitution Study Radio. Every Sunday morning, time can vary, but it's anywhere from 6 to 9 p.m. or a.m. 6 to 9 a.m. Pacific time, so you don't want to miss that either. Where he spoke on political news topics of the day, all the while using those events to illustrate the wisdom inherent in our founders and the Constitution itself. A humble man, Doug was soon asked to teach classes about the Constitution and later to guest on other shows, and then on cable network news programs like Fox and Friends twice, like Sean Hannity, like Al Jazeera, like National Public Radio, but not CNN, because they're chicken. They're cowards. They are either that or they knew their limitations and chose not to risk it. It's hard to believe that Doug was once turned down as a guest on a legal show because having someone without a law degree discussing the Constitution was ludicrous and demeaning to the legal profession. Well, it would have been embarrassing for them. That's one thing. That's one thing for sure. Mr. Gibbs is gregarious, earnest, and masterful in his ability to use current world events to help us all better understand this most historic document, the defined structure of the branches of government within our republic and ourselves. Liberty Tree Media Group is proud to market and host podcasts of and live simulcast Constitution Radio with Douglas V. Gibbs at LibertyTreeMediaGroup.com. Syndication, ladies and gentlemen. Check out www.douglasvgibbs.com, his incredibly popular blog, due in no small part to me, politicalpistachio.com, and also, as I just mentioned to the YouTube audience, so I will mention to the podcast audience, don't miss our twin YouTube channels. YouTube.com/user/HardStarboard Radio for the most listened to podcast of the previous week. and youtube.com/user/American Daily Review 2. That's the number 2 at the end of that. For the previous Saturday afternoon extravaganza, all smushed together into the 3-hour program that it in reality is, and in the very near future, God willing, will actually become. So don't miss that. Can't remember if I had anything. Did I have anything to add to that? Oh yeah, the fact that it would last Saturday afternoon extravaganza would already be on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/user/American Daily Review 2. But my broadcasting computer blue screened last night, so I got to upload the bloody thing all over again. Hopefully, it won't. My broadcasting computer won't blue screen tonight as it did last night, and it will be available by tomorrow morning. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, did you know that there's an election next week? Ah, boy, my browser is starting to act up, ladies and gentlemen. Let's see if I can make this work. Now, this is an item, the first item on the stack. It's kind of a prelude to what we're going to discuss today, which is that aforementioned election next Tuesday that has been so far in the background that it's, you know, I only recently realized this myself. It's like, whoa, there is a midterm election next week. And we're talking about so many other things. We're talking about the border crisis and the Ebola epidemic and the rise of the Islamic State and just so many other different things going on. And Barack Obama's incipient tyranny that it's just gotten shoved into the background, which actually, when you stop and think about it, tends to suggest how poorly, how disastrously the Democrats are looking to do next Tuesday, because if they were looking to be victorious, we'd be hearing a lot more about the 2014 midterms, it seems to me. But look at the reasons why next Tuesday is looking to be not a good one for congressional Democrats up for re-election in the House and Senate. America's October Worries. Victor Davis Hanson took a look at this actually last week. When would it have been? Last Thursday. Yeah, Thursday. Unlike the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, many of all of the threats we currently face are self-created. Self-created in the sense of who 62 million numbnuts, the 51% or the 52% or whatever, voted for in 2008 and 2012. Now, in October of 1962, America worried whether an untried young president, John F. Kennedy, could keep us safe from nuclear missiles from nearby communist Cuba. Today's October worries are more insidious. The Ebola virus, the macabre Islamic State, a tottering stock market, a bellicose Russia, and a crisis of confidence in our government. Much of what the Obama regime and the Centers for Disease Control initially swore about the Ebola virus proved false. The virus really did infect Americans at home, despite assurances that there was no significant risk. There always was a danger of infected West Africans entering the U.S. The CDC protocols did not protect nurses from infection by Ebola patients. Banning all travel from West African countries where the virus is epidemic may not stop Ebola from spreading throughout the U.S., but the regime still cannot offer convincing reasons why we should not try just that. Instead, a purely medical decision seems hopelessly embedded in the regime's usual politically correct spin. The United States is even more inept in dealing with the Islamic State. That terrorist virus, too, could have been contained had we just kept some peacekeepers in the mostly quiet Iraq of 2011. Well, once again, politics, not strategic logic, explains why the regime pulled all troops out of Iraq. A recklessness that turned up as a 2012 campaign propaganda point. The stock market is wobbly, and for good reason. A record number of Americans have dropped out of the workforce. I'm holding up my hand. Those of you on the YouTube feed can see it. Well, I haven't dropped out of the workforce. I was forcibly ejected from it and have been barred access back into it. Let's put it that way. The quiver of traditional priming, zero interest rates, massive deficit spending, huge government stimulus, is now empty. It always was empty, frankly. It was empty 35 years ago, quite honestly. But each generation has to learn these things for themselves. Yet, the economy still stinks. 6 years of piling up more debt, raising taxes, suffocating what's left of the private sector in fascistic regulation, perpetuating deficits, slashing defense, expanding social programs, and creating vast new bureaucracies have only stifled economic growth. Gee, what a shock! Stunning! Stunning! Barack Obama has no interest in trying something other than boilerplate, Marxist, Alinskyist borrowing. And he never will either. Russian dictator Vladimir Putin is portrayed around the world as a merciless tiger, while Obama is caricatured as a frail kitten. How dare you soil the honor of kittens, Professor Hansen, by using them to describe the devil's advocate. How about frail poodle? I mean, I like dogs too, but poodles barely qualify as dogs. So. Funny, the Apostle Paul described the first century equivalent of Barack Obama's as dogs, which is ironic in turn because, well, dog is what Barack Obama used to eat a lot of. Back in his days in Indonesia as Barry Soetoro. Much of once pro-Western Eastern Europe is now lining up with Putin because they have no other choice. Yep, the Warsaw Pact is resurrecting, ladies and gentlemen. Eastern Europe cut deals with Russia rather than be left high and dry by a sermonizing but otherwise appeasing West. Once unimpeachable federal agencies now appear as 19th century tribal fiefdoms. No one much trusts the IRS anymore. I don't think anybody ever really did. Check out my piece, by the way, at politicalpistachio.com on how the IRS is seizing the bank accounts of people who are not even under criminal investigation, much less criminally charged with anything. It's a sight to behold, ladies and gentlemen. It's not surprising, but it's still surreal. It resides in the category of things you always suspected, made mention of, maybe in a half tongue-in-cheek, hyperbolic sense, but now they're actually coming true. Let's see. Partisan politics seem to determine whether Americans are audited. Yeah, I'd say that's about right. The Commissariat of Veterans Affairs covered up callous and occasionally lethal treatment of scores of hospitalized veterans. The National Security Agency lied about monitoring the communications of average Americans. Almost nothing in Obama's lectures about the new Affordable Care Act proved accurate. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement cannot come clean about the nation's utter lack of border enforcement with Mexico, or the utter lack of a border, period. Yeah, I bet you didn't know that Mexico's northern border is now with Canada. The once hallowed Secret Service seems incompetent and scandal-ridden. Reichsfuhrer Erich the Red Holder's Commissariat of Injustice, Revenge, and Cover-Up has picked and chosen which laws to enforce, largely out of partisan considerations. And by the way, that's flagrantly unconstitutional and illegal. NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, is hardly recognizable, not least of which because we don't have a space program anymore. This director said that the agency's first concern was not our continued reliance on Vladimir Putin's space rockets, but Muslim outreach and climate change. Even the Patent and Trade Office hounded the Washington Redskins about their supposedly politically incorrect logo by canceling the team's trademark registration. One abuse of power after another. Excuse me. I'm recycling lunch in slow motion, folks, so you have to bear with me. Whether the Obama regime shuts down U.S. travel to and from a foreign airport is not predicated on national security threats, but political correctness and anti-Semitism. Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv not that long ago was put off limits to U.S. airlines despite offering far less of a hazard to Americans than the connecting flights to the airport in Monrovia, Liberia. The new Ebola czar, Ron Klain, a former Fannie Mae lobbyist who was also knee-deep in the Solyndra controversy, has no healthcare experience, much less any experience with epidemics, but he was the point man in Al Gore's attempt to steal the 2000 election. Fixer, in other words. He was picked only because he's a veteran partisan brawler who understands that the Obama regime sees Ebola as more a political liability than a health challenge. The regime is waging a half-hearted effort to destroy the Islamic State because Obama has in the past damned just such preemptive bombing in the Middle East. Now, an embarrassed Obama relies on the Bush administration's 2002 military authorizations to use the sort of force in the Middle East that he used to decry and disdain. Russia is ascendant, largely because of the State Commissariat's loud boast of resetting the Bush administration's punishments of Putin's past aggressions, which itself was an admission by the Bush administration that no, actually W didn't see into Tsar Vlad's heart. And yeah, we do have to get tough with the Russians. The Obama regime sees government agencies as political tools to advance its agenda, as we have seen with NASA's new Muslim outreach, the IRS hounding of conservative nonprofit groups, and the Patent Office's antagonization of the Redskins. The October missiles of 1962 were never launched, but the crisis still forced JFK to adopt a new realism about the Soviet Union. In contrast, for Obama to meet these current October threats head-on, he first would have to admit they were largely self-created, and that he will not do. Well, as always, there are two ways to look at the 2014 midterms. Optimistically and realistically. And I'm going to have my final predictions for the outcome of the Senate races up, the United States Senate races up for grabs, supposedly, next Tuesday. On Sunday at politicalpistachio.com, so you won't want to miss those. You may not like them if you're of the same partisan inclinations as yours truly. Here's a clue. Whatever the final polls say, ladies and gentlemen, undecideds typically break 2-1 against the incumbent, but then there's a 2% adjustment for voter fraud in the Democrats' direction. So if the final outcome would otherwise be 53% to the Republican, 47% to the Democrat, you have to adjust that to 51-49 Republican, because otherwise, well, I mean, you just have to figure that in. That's the world we live in. I mean, I got an item in the stack for tomorrow from Patorico.com that will address the true magnitude of voter fraud in this country. And actually, it's something we talked about last week on the Hard Starboard Radio Network. But it was the same study was reported in the Washington Post over the weekend. The Washington Post, ladies and gentlemen. So, I mean, it's probably, beneath the tide schedules and above the deja vu ads on page Z97, but still, Washington Post, folks. Well, wonders never cease. It's like the New York Times reported. What was the? Oh yeah, the New York Times were the ones that reported about the IRS stealing innocent Americans' bank accounts. The New York Times reported this over the weekend. I don't know what's gotten into those people, frankly. It's like they've come down with a serious case of journalism. Now, Sherman Frederick is a columnist for Stevens Media. He writes on general interest topics. His column appears Sunday in the Viewpoints. I just love that. Jumps to another tab, even though it's a tab that needed attention, but still. Pain in the neck. All right. The Viewpoints opinion section of the Las Vegas Review-Journal. So this is where this comes from. As I say, you can look at next Tuesday's election optimistically or realistically. Mr. Frederick takes the optimistic view. He tells Democrats, sorry, the ghost of the Obamidency will linger. Or you could say the stink. The expression, the chickens have come home to roost, has been around for almost as long as the English language. Geoffrey Chaucer used it in the Parson's Tale. And oft times which, cursing wrongfully, returneth again to him that curseth, as a bird that returneth again to his own nest. Next Tuesday, the unpopularity of Barack Obama's miserable presidency will come home to roost squarely on the heads of Democrats nationwide. All those empty Obama speeches about the prosperity of the middle class, a safer world, better health care, immigration dignity, etc., coupled with the optics of a president who is seen more often at parties, golf courses, and fundraisers than at the office working, provide a nearly impossible hurdle for Democrats. question isn't whether the Democrat Party will suffer a net loss in November. The question is how long the ghost, the stink of Obama will haunt his party. And please don't take Mr. Frederick's word for it. Take that of Hillary Rodham Clinton. She already wears a hazardous materials pantsuit when anywhere near the one in his policies. Although she's just yesterday, she repeated them when she was campaigning for Democrat Massachusetts gubernatorial candidate Martha Coakley. Yes, the same Martha Coakley that lost Ted Kennedy's Senate seat to Scott Brown, who then lost it to Elizabeth Warren, to whom Hillary Clinton is going to lose the 2016 Democrat nomination race, assuming that there is a 2016 election at all. Hillary dissed O in her book, as did her husband's acolyte, former Obama CIA and Director and Commissar of Defense Leon Panetta. Stand by for a lot more of that kind of nasty infighting. The Empress, of course, cannot totally divorce herself from the Obama curse because she's part of it. But at least she's got a couple of years for voters to forget about it before her next election try, where she's going to lose to Pocahontas anyway, so I don't know why. Again, this is going to be a real pain in my backside. Having to listen to all this, Hillary, Hillary, Hillary. It's not going to be Hillary. Hillary Clinton is the most overrated politician of her or maybe any other generation. 2008 was her shot. She didn't get it done. She's not going to get another chance. I'm telling you that right now. October the 27th, 2014, Hillary Clinton will never be the Democrat nominee for president. Forget president. She's never going to be the Democrat nominee. Ever. Graven it in graven. Write it in stone, folks. Pity those Democrat incumbents locked in re-election races this election cycle. For them, the Obama curse unfolds in real time. Mark Pryor in Arkansas, Mark Begich in Alaska, Mary Landrieu in Louisiana, Mark Udall in Colorado, all run and hide from their complicity in promoting the Obama agenda. The poster girl for this is Senator Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire. She voted 99% of the time with Obama, just like Obama told Al Sharpton the other day, actually. Yet, when asked in a public forum whether she approved of the job Obama is doing, she said, "In some ways I approve, and some things I don't approve," which drew hysterical laughter from the crowd. That was at the Shaheen-Brown debate over the weekend. It drew hysterical laughter from the crowd. And by the way, we're going to have several cuts from that debate on tomorrow's edition of the Hard Starboard Radio Network, so you won't want to miss that. Did that go to... Yeah, her Senator Shaheen's, that is, home state audience laughed out loud at her ridiculous evasion. If a relatively safe Democrat candidate such as Shaheen can't stand tall with Barack Hussein Obama, one can understand why Barack Hussein Obama hasn't been invited to campaign for Democrats in more competitive states, aside from Anthony Brown, the next governor of Maryland, with whom he campaigned a week ago. That's because he's already poisoned to the brand. He's political Ebola, although no Democrat will come out and publicly say it. Last week, the dictator called Al Sharpton's race-baiting radio show and said this. How is it Al Sharpton has a radio show? Well, we're going to have it. We're going to have it. It's still coming, but, we're going to have it here eventually. Al Sharpton, good Lord. But Barack Obama called Al Sharpton's race-baiting radio show and said this about Democrat incumbents facing stiff election challenges. Quote, "The bottom line is, though, that these are all folks who vote with me. They have supported my agenda in Congress, so this isn't about my feelings being hurt. These are folks who are strong allies and supporters of me. I tell them, you do what you need to do to win. I will be responsible for making sure that our voters turn out." Al Sharpton? Our voters? Could a dictator get more desperate, not to mention more demeaning? What's the old saying? The difference between genius and stupid is that genius has its limits. Candidates such as Pryor and Landrieu cannot be happy. The dictator not only injects race into the mix, he confirms that his senators talk one way when they go home but vote with him in Washington. As we enter the last full week before the election, the Real Clear Politics average of polls in the various U.S. Senate races shows Democrats likely to lose a net of 7 seats, and thus control of the United States Senate next year to the GOP. Add that to the fact that the 6th year of a presidency usually turns out badly for the president's party anyway, and this election looks ugly for Democrats all the way around. But the real question is how long Obama's failed presidency, which, and remember folks, I don't think it's failed, I think it's been a tremendous success in terms of its actual goals and objectives and intentions. Let's face it, lack of performance does have its consequences. Will roost upon the Democrat brand. Think Jimmy Carter. Squared. I'm looking at a Lockheed Martin banner ad, and I could swear, what the hell? That was weird. I could swear that the guy on the left in the picture of this Lockheed Martin banner ad is Sheldon Cooper. I mean, it is Sheldon Cooper. It's uncanny. I don't know. I wonder if they realized that when they took this picture for this banner ad. It's remarkable. Now we turn to somebody who's a little less sanguine about Republican chances next Tuesday. Peter Augustine Lawler at the Postmodern Conservative blog at National Review Online. And he wonders whether both sides have done the necessary homework in Thumpin studies, ladies and gentlemen. Now, he just heard on NPR, this is yesterday, the studies show that Americans don't care about the upcoming midterm election, despite the record amount of money that's been spent to psych them up. That, of course, might be dismissed as liberal spin, As I mentioned earlier in the first hour here of the Hard Starboard Radio Network, the Monday, October 27th, 2014 edition. Anytime I'm about to lose some big game, I explain that I don't even care, and no one else does anyway. Of course, Mr. Lawler also heard on NBCCCP that voters don't care because they're disgusted with gridlock. They don't think voting can give them change they can believe in. Well, they got it in 2008, and apparently they didn't believe in it. Although they did believe in it enough to give themselves at least 4 more years of it 2 years ago. Polls really do show that voters are disgusted with the 2 elected branches of government, but a truthful analysis would have to add, outrage is focused especially on the person who is president. The genius of our system is that typically blame for the country's not going in the right direction is focused on the branch where all the power is held by one person. Or in this case, the 2 branches where all the power is held by one person. Still, it's unclear whether this election is going to be a Republican wave when it comes to the Senate. The odds are the Republicans will end up with control of that chamber, but the particular races have a lot of quirks and uncertainties, and nobody really knows what's going to happen. At the top of that fuzzy list is Georgia, where Nate Silver, whose analyses do deploy sensibly the data that are readily available, thinks the most likely outcome is a January 6th runoff. Mr. Lawler isn't as sure, thinking that Michelle Nunn is closing pretty strong. She's the Democrat, by the way. She saved her best positive commercial, featuring her statesman dad, remember Sam Nunn? Saving that for last. Now, if this were a wave year, or if this is a wave year, the polls wouldn't be picking up completely the anti-Obama surge. Not only that, you might add, but the last couple of polls actually do seem to show a modest Purdue surge. In most wave years, there is an element of good luck. The party that rides the wave happens to win just about all the close ones. Now, perhaps the most telling early sign of the big Republican wave, Silver reminds us, would be a Scott Brown victory in New Hampshire. The polls show the race pretty much a dead heat. And again, I got those Shaheen clips from that debate over the weekend, which you won't want to miss. It sounded like a particularly raucous night at the Improv, shall we say. We'll have that tomorrow on Hard Starboard Radio. The polls show the Shaheen Brown race pretty much a dead heat. But few really believe at this point that that's a close one the Republicans should believe in. President Bush the younger, Bush 43, George W. Bush, candidly described his 2006 repudiation as a thumpin'. Bill Clinton described his 1994 experience in equally candid, if less folksy, terms. As Peggy Noonan reminds us this week, the first step in a 12-step presidential self-help program is acknowledging not only that the voters think you have some big problems, but that you really are pretty bleeping clueless. Certainly Clinton and Bush both became much better or less clueless presidents in response to a wake-up thumping. Well, Bush ordered the surge after the 2006 midterms. And Clinton had the good sense to, since the Republicans had already taken over Congress, to let Congress run the country, and then he just sat there and took credit for it and otherwise diddled interns. So Bill Clinton, in his way, became, well, at the very least, he became less clueless. Basically, he let congressional Republicans run the country rather than his wife, who now thinks she's going to be president in 2016. Barack Obama didn't derive an equivalent therapeutic benefit from his 2010 thumping, or shellacking, if you will. thinking it was necessary collateral damage for the great progress and social justice that was Obamacare, among other things. And of course, gods are omniscient, so there's nothing for them to learn, is there? They already know everything. And I have to point this out. Wasn't that vindicated in 2012? He moved even further left, and he won. Just as the Federalists expected, he took refuge in his fixed term, expecting that the positive benefits of his reforms would kick in by 2012. Well, they didn't. But he got away with asking for both more time and with blaming his predecessor for things remaining screwed up and exacerbated. Maybe, most precisely, he could plausibly claim that things were somewhat better than they were in 2009. The economy wasn't bad enough on election day that Romney could get away with the economy, enough said, as his ticket to ousting the incumbent. As Mr. Lawler has said before, maybe the most self-evident reason for not re-electing any president these days is that second terms have been pretty uniformly disappointing in recent decades, partly due to the 22nd Amendment. Obama's drop-off in popularity and competence has been combined with a startling upgrade of aggressively rogue executive action. A lot of that behavior can be explained by the inability to run for re-election. The Constitution, in a way, becomes the president's enemy if his second is undeniably his final term. Of course, he can decree himself as many terms as he wants, so I wouldn't be talking about the 22nd Amendment if I were Mr. Lawler. Even the dictator's friends are worrying big time about his cluelessness. It just proves that they're the ones that are clueless. His fecklessness in the face of change he didn't anticipate and is really slow to believe in. President Bush's friends were doing the same in 2006. Maybe nothing could help Obama's performance more than a thumpin', or to use his word, shellacking. He's stuck with acknowledging. Well, he'll never acknowledge it. That's kind of the point. He'll never acknowledge it. That goes for everything from thinking realistically as commander-in-chief to he'll never do, to backing off on obviously unconstitutional executive orders, which he really won't do. In fact, a Republican Senate means he's going to be ruling entirely by decree. Congress is already irrelevant. And when Republicans take over the Senate, that it will be more obvious than it's ever been before. Trust me on this, folks. Case in point, amnesty by executive decree after the election. It's like I wrote over the weekend, or actually it might have been just this morning. Take solace and enjoyment and savor next Tuesday if it goes our way, my fellow pachyderms, because it's the last time it ever will. Now, the situation might actually be pretty perfect for Obama and the Republican leaders in Congress to start working with each other. Well, you don't count on that happening. Mr. Lawler hopes the Republicans don't get caught up in the illusions that they can govern from Congress or that they can put the country on hold until they recapture the White House in 2016, which they won't. That's not to say that they shouldn't be developing a cogent 2016 plan, beginning with coming up with a candidate who can both win and govern. I wouldn't count on that either. But they shouldn't count on that plan's working out. Studies show, for example, that Mitt Romney would easily beat Obama now, although if you gave them a rematch next Tuesday, Obama would win. I promise you. Obama will always win. Always. Yeah, the rest of this is crap. Anyway, it's time for the top of the hour break. In fact, we're about 3 minutes past it. So let's go to the top of the hour break. These faux commercial words. If I can actually get at the audio. Oh, there we go. On the Hard Starboard Radio Network, it's Monday, October the 27th, 2014. We'll be back. Hour number 2, the Hard Starboard Radio Network. And it's October the 27th, 2014, the week that I turn half a century old, ladies and gentlemen. But I do get a free dinner out of it. Actually, I get a couple. I get a free Grand Slam breakfast at Denny's. And I also am being treated to dinner out by my daughter, intern Mrs. And there will be some other things going on in that regard over the brief weekend that she's here. So that's something to look forward to. And I was reminded again, not that I'm not aware of my impending Big 5-0, but today, ladies and gentlemen, is the 50th anniversary of the famous Ronald Reagan "A Time for Choosing" speech. Now, of course, he gave that speech on October the 27th, 1964, 4 days before I was born. And it was really kind of the national coming out, political coming out, of Ronald Wilson Reagan on the national stage. And it didn't do much for Goldwater. I mean, it raised $8 million for his campaign, which, given the technological limitations of 50 years ago, they weren't able to do anything with it. That would be about $60 million in today's money, by the way. But it did do an awful lot for conservatism, and it did do an awful lot for Ronald Reagan. Let's see, was it John Fund? Yeah, John Fund commemorates the "A Time for Choosing" speech at the corner at National Review Online today. And I hasten to add that in the opener for American Daily Review, the 2 Reagan clips that you hear in the open of American Daily Review each week are from that very speech, "A Time for Choosing." Now, today marks the 50th anniversary of what has become known as simply the speech. The actual title Ronald Reagan gave to the address with which he electrified a nation during a 30-minute broadcast for the failing Goldwater campaign was "A Time for Choosing." Goldwater lost a week later to Lyndon Johnson, but conservative presidential politics had a North Star in Reagan after that. It defined conservatism for 50 years, Reagan biographer Craig Shirley concluded. Washington Post columnist David Broder wrote that the night of Reagan's address represented the most successful political debut since William Jennings Bryan and his Cross of Gold speech in 1896. The difference, of course, being that William Jennings Bryan tried for and lost the presidency 3 consecutive cycles. 1896, 1900, 1904. Ronald Reagan was president of the United States for 2 terms, from 1980 to 1988, and was the greatest president of the 20th century, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I didn't know it then, Reagan wrote in his 1991 autobiography, but that speech was one of the most important milestones of my life. Financially, it raised a stunning, as we mentioned mere moments ago, $8 million, over $60 million in today's money for the flailing Goldwater campaign, most of which couldn't be spent in those days when checks were delivered by regular mail. But as former Reagan aide Jeffrey Lord reminds us, the real importance of the speech was that Reagan had looked Americans in the eye and stood for something. That's a little telegraphing for the next, well, actually, it's a couple items ahead in the stack here, which hopefully we'll have a chance to get through here in hour number 2 of the Hard Starboard Radio Network on this Monday, October 27th, 2014. It was a different Ronald Reagan than the one many Americans remember as president who gave the speech that night. As historian Stephen Hayward noted in the Washington Post on Sunday, yesterday that is, it was not the avuncular, optimistic Reagan of his film roles or of his subsequent political career that emphasized morning in America and the shining city on a hill, but a comparatively angry and serious Reagan, serving up partisan red meat against liberalism and the Democrats, whose party he'd been a member of only 2 years before at the time. In the middle of the Cold War, Reagan forthrightly said liberals refused to acknowledge that there is no argument over the choice between peace or war, but there is only one guaranteed way you can have peace, and you can have it in the next second: surrender. On domestic issues, Reagan was equally blunt. Now, one side in this campaign has been telling us that the issues of this election are the maintenance of peace and prosperity. The line has been used, we've never had it so good. But I have an uncomfortable feeling that this prosperity isn't something on which we can base our hopes for the future. Many people have their favorite lines from the Reagan address. Here's a sample of Mr. Funds. No government ever voluntarily reduces itself in size. So government's programs, once launched, never disappear. Actually, a government bureau is the nearest thing to eternal life we'll ever see on this earth. If government planning and welfare would have the answer, shouldn't we expect government to read the score to us once in a while? Shouldn't they be telling us about the decline each year and the number of people needing help? But the reverse is true. Each year the need grows great, the program grows greater. And here's the one from the Open to American Daily Review. You hear it every Saturday at blogtalkradio.com/American Daily Review. This is the issue of this election. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government, or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves. You and I know, and I do not believe that life is so dear and peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery. If nothing in life is worth dying for, when did this begin? Just in the face of this enemy? Or should Moses have told the children of Israel to live in slavery under the Pharaohs? Should Christ have refused the cross? Should the patriots at Concord Bridge have thrown down their guns and refused to fire the shot heard round the world? What marks the speech, as distinct from so much of political rhetoric today, was its authenticity. Stuart Stevens, the former strategist for the 2012 Romney campaign, notes that it still vibrates with a passionate intensity rarely found in any contemporary political discourse. This wasn't a focus-grouped, calculated appeal to different constituencies. It was the voice of one man deeply troubled by the course of his nation. But Reagan was also interested in reaching out to others so they too would share his concern. He more than once reminded people he had very recently been a Democrat, but he now felt that party had left him rather than him leaving that party. He was already attempting to build the coalition of Reagan Democrats that would carry him to 2 landslide elections. Pardon me. I believe that the issues confronting us across party lines, he said, reminding the audience of his history as a Democrat. You and I are told increasingly we have to choose between a left or a right. Well, I'd like to suggest there is no such thing as a left or right. There is only an up or down. Man's age-old dream, the ultimate individual freedom consistent with order, or down to the ant heap of totalitarianism. The fact that in our overly sensitive and easily offended age that such stirring rhetoric is so rare is a partial indictment of where our politics has failed. While issues come and go, there are fundamental questions of America's future and place in the world that need to be addressed in overarching terms. That's what Reagan's The Speech was all about. We need leaders who will speak in such terms again. And that segues right into Lee Edwards' piece today. The National Review Online. Another time for choosing. Ronald Reagan made history with his speech 50 years ago. Now Republicans need a new great communicator. And I don't think he's talking about zombie Reagan. 50 years ago to the day, a political star was born in America. His name, Ronald Reagan. And he seized the national imagination with a mesmerizing television address entitled A Time for Choosing. The address was described by political analysts David Broder and Stephen Hess as the most successful political debut since William Jennings Bryan electrified the 1896 Democratic Convention. It brought in $1 million in contributions to the RNC in the first 24 hours. It shifted many votes. God, can you imagine how bad the Johnson landslide would have been otherwise? Oh my God. The Republican nominee Barry Goldwater gained several percentage points following the telecast. Republican leaders said they would not have approached Reagan to run for governor of California in 1966 if he had not made his TV talk. What was there about this speech and the man who delivered it that altered the course of history, if only temporarily? As Republican presidential hopefuls consider what to say and how to say it leading up to the 2016 election, assuming there is one, they would do well to examine the speech that transformed Ronald Reagan into a national political leader overnight. The Time for Choosing was Reagan's work from beginning to end. He researched it, he wrote it, and he delivered it without a teleprompter, ladies and gentlemen. Or a manuscript. He spoke from his memory, and he spoke from his heart, folks. And it was seamless, it was passionate, it was real, it was authentic. All he had was a packet of 4x6-inch note cards in which he had written in his own shorthand key phrases, quotes, and statistics. The choice before the American people, he began, is between two starkly different visions of America and the kind of government we should have. One side says, you never had it so good, and the nation is at peace. But Reagan asked, do they really mean peace, or do they mean we just want to be left in peace? There can be no real peace, he said, when we're at war with the most dangerous enemy that has ever faced mankind in his long climb from the swamps to the stars. Now, we didn't come from the swamps, but nobody's perfect, right? If we lose our freedom, history will record with the greatest astonishment that those who had the most to lose did the least to prevent its happening. He sharpened the differences between the two sides and the importance of the choice. It's time, he said, to ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers. It's another clip from the opener to American Daily Review, ladies and gentlemen. Saturdays, 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific, at blogtalkradio.com/American Daily Review. Those freedoms are based on one idea: that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people. It's still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. The choice before the people, Reagan stated, is simple. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government, or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves. Any conservative, then or now, would be hard-pressed to present a more concise argument against the Obaminist paradigm. Next, Reagan addressed and rejected the liberal argument that we have to choose between a left or right. There's no such thing as left or right, he argued. There's only an up or down. Up to man's age-old dreams of individual freedom consistent with law and order, or down to the ant heap of totalitarianism. He quoted liberal Democrat voices such as those of Senator J. William Fulbright of Arkansas, who said that the Constitution was, quote, outmoded, close quote. Does this sound familiar, ladies and gentlemen? And Senator Joseph Clark of Pennsylvania, who defined liberalism as meeting the material needs of the masses through the full power of centralized government. Sounds like Obamanomics, doesn't it? Reagan responded that he resented it when a representative of the people referred to you and me, the free men and women of this country, as the masses. As for the full power of centralized government, that was exactly what the Founding Fathers sought to minimize, because they knew that a government can't control the economy without controlling the people. He proceeded to give a number of examples in which government had tried and failed to solve problems, such as farm subsidies, public housing, unemployment, poverty, juvenile delinquency programs. He used humor to expose the failed policies of the other side. The trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant, it's that they know so much that isn't so. Addressing key issues, Reagan suggested common sense solutions, such as introducing voluntary features in Social Security, stopping foreign aid that is used to buy dress suits for Greek undertakers and extra wives for Kenyan government officials, without which Barack Obama might not even exist, now that I think about it. From the beginning to the end of his address, his primary target was the ever-increasing size of government. Actually, a government bureau is the nearest thing to eternal life that we'll ever see on this earth. He concluded by laying out the most important choice of all: peace through strength, or peace through appeasement. Conceding that there was a risk in standing firm, Reagan declared that you and I do not believe that life is so dear and peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery. He quoted Alexander Hamilton, who said that a nation which can prefer disgrace to danger is prepared for a master and deserves one. Borrowing from FDR and Abraham Lincoln, Ronald Reagan said to an audience of millions, "You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We'll preserve for our children this, the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness." Which, for the record, began on November the 6th. Oh, what was it? Remember the... No. Well, let's just go to the with Inauguration Day, 2009. We're 6 years into that darkness, my friends. I guess we got 994 years left. Hey, Well, just like Morpheus, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more. But he finished with a message of hope and optimism that is wholly unwarranted today. You and I have the ability and the dignity and the right to make our own decisions and determine our own destiny. What we no longer have is the power to do so. 25 years later, in his 1989 farewell address, President Reagan displayed his sure command of political rhetoric by denying that he was a great communicator, that he was merely a great communicator. He said disarmingly, "I wasn't a great communicator, but I communicated great things." The truth is that he was a great communicator, one of the greatest in American politics, who communicated great things such as liberty, justice, and equality that used to shape America, but that Barack Hussein Obama has killed stone cold dead to the hearty approval of the 52%. Isn't it time, indeed past time, for another great communicator who can articulate the unique American spirit? Well, it would have been if that spirit still existed. Regrettably, this is not 1964. This is not 1980. This is not 1989. This is no longer America. It is the United Soviet Socialist States of Obamamerikistan. America died almost 2 years ago. And if it's ever coming back, it's going to be a long, hard, uphill struggle. And if there is a 2016 election, well, Henry Olsen is pretty much declared in the latest issue of National Review, forget the Alamo, folks. Forget a time for choosing. This is not that America. Now, Tea Partiers, I'm going to give you ample warning. If you don't want to have your heads explode, if you don't want to have your blood pressure driven to levels that even mine didn't reach 4 years ago, then you might want to skip the rest of this podcast, because I'm about to dispense some cold, hard reality that you're not going to want to hear. You've been warned. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Senator Ted Cruz is a bright man with a bright idea. Conservatives have no power because their leaders have no principles. Rediscover the latter, he says, and we will recover the former. Would that it were so. Start with Cruz's retelling of Republican presidential history. He claims that beginning with Richard Nixon, every Republican nominee who was elected ran as a strong conservative, while every loser ran as a moderate. Cruz was born in December 1970 and clearly has hazy memories at best of the 1968 and 72 races, the latter of which saw National Review endorse John Ashbrook, a conservative congressman from Ohio, in the GOP primaries rather than Nixon. Be that as it may, this is an all too simple formulation that overlooks the way politically successful conservatives have always tempered parts of the conservative agenda precisely to gain a principled majority. Ronald Reagan, whom Cruz frequently invokes in support of his argument, happens to be the best example of this approach. In 1964, the Gipper opposed the creation of Medicare. But in 1980, he frequently said he would not try to eliminate or even reform the program. Reagan recognized that it was better to focus on the things he could change than on those he could not. He understood that principle and prudence are tightly intertwined. It's possible that the country has moved to the right since Reagan's day, making a more consistent conservatism politically possible. That indeed is the unstated assumption of Cruz's idea, that an unwavering conservative majority already exists if only we had to find the courage to mobilize it. My friend Douglas V. Gibbs believes the same thing. We're a conservative country. There's still a 60% conservative, at least 60% of Americans are conservative. They just, most just don't know it yet. Again, would that it were so. All the available data show that this is not true. And I just put it in straightforward fashion. If 60% of the American people are conservative, then why the hell don't they vote that way? Why is it that only one Republican presidential candidate in the last 26 years has ever won a majority of the popular vote? George W. Bush in 2004. Since George H.W. Bush won 54% of the popular vote in 1988, you want to know what it's been? Bush 41 in 1992, 38%. Bob Dole in 1996, 41%. George W. Bush in 2000, 48%. John McCain in 2008, 46%. Mitt Romney in 2012, 48%. Where is this conservative majority, and why don't they vote that way? Why don't they vote their convictions? Why don't they vote, period? As Henry Olson says, America is not a conservative country, folks. The number of self-described conservatives has remained relatively consistent for more than 40 years. Depending on the poll and the year, it has fluctuated between 33 and 40%. The number of self-described Republicans has moved more significantly, but it has never risen above a third for more than a year. Unlike victory in Texas, victory nationwide requires the GOP nominee to attract significant numbers of self-described moderate independents. These data do not significantly change when GOP-leading independents are added to the mix. Republican support has never reached 50% in any year, and the GOP has almost always lagged behind the Democrats since well before 1980. Indeed, the best GOP showing vis-a-vis the Democrats since the halcyon days of the Gingrich Revolution came in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, when the GOP ran slightly ahead of the Democrats. Democrat Party preference, including leaders, exceeded Republican preference even in the GOP wave year of 2010. Poll data also refute the notion that there are large groups of moderates who really are consistent conservatives. A recent Pew Research poll found that a plurality of people who held mostly liberal views called themselves moderates, and nearly a third of those who held consistently liberal views thought they were moderate as well. By comparison, only 13%, 1 out of every 8 people with consistently conservative views called themselves moderates. Indeed, exit polls show that, in other words, a moderate is a dishonest liberal. And those who call themselves liberal are honest liberals. They're still dishonest, but they're honest about what they actually are. Indeed, exit polls show that a majority of moderates have not voted for a Republican presidential candidate since 1984. and that moderates have been more Democrat than the country as a whole since 1980, when Ronald Reagan was first elected president. Senator Cruz never confronts such numbers directly. Yeah, probably along the lines of, well, those are all liberal polls, so you can't trust any of those numbers. Well, remember, polls, the point of polls is that the action takes place at the margins. That's the nature of polls. So you can quibble about, 5 points this way, 5 points that way, but overall, the overall numbers, that you can't just throw that out. You can't just call the whole thing crap. I mean, there's something in there. There's truth in there, and often, if you're a conservative, it's usually truth you don't want to face. I mean, who is the current rating political polling guru? Nate Silver, right? Nate Silver called every single state accurately for the New York Times and his 538.com website. So it's not Scott Rasmussen, it's not John Zogby, Nate Silver, folks. Senator Cruz did, though, tell the Claremont Institute earlier this year that over 2 million voters who traditionally vote Republican stayed home in 2012. Which, if true, well, how stupid were they? He then lists Obama's victory margin in the 7 closest states, noting that they total 727,000 votes and that fewer than 1 million votes would have produced 84 electoral votes, more than enough to win. Cruz's implication is clear. These voters stayed home because Romney wasn't conservative enough, or maybe because he was a Mormon. And if they do vote, a real conservative will win. This is at best a distortion of the facts. Turnout was down in 2012, but not in 6 of the 7 swing states Cruz cites. Of those 7, only Ohio cast fewer votes in 2012. And the difference, 128,000, was smaller than Obama's margin in the state. Moreover, in 3 of the swing states Cruz cites, voters actually cast more ballots in 2012 than in 2008. But there's no evidence that in these states there was a GOP-specific fall in turnout that was counterbalanced by a rise in turnout among Democrat voters. If we instead measure the decline in the percentage of all eligible voters who turned out, we find that in 2 other swing states, the difference was too small to account for Obama's victory. Only in Ohio and Florida was turnout, measured as a percentage of all eligible voters, down by enough that theoretically the drop accounted for Obama's win there. And these 2 states would not have provided enough electoral college votes to defeat Obama had they supported Romney instead. Even that is a stretch. 80% of Ohio's missing vote would have had to go to Romney for him to win there. And of the conservatives and Republicans who did vote, the vast majority did not abandon Romney. In fact, Romney carried 93% of Republicans, which tied for the all-time high since exit polling began in 1972. His 82% among conservatives sounds low until you compare it with the percentages other GOP nominees won. Only George W. Bush in 2004 bested that share, with 84%. And the only other candidate who ever equaled it was Ronald Reagan in his 1984 landslide. Senator Cruz is fond of contrasting his stance with those of Washington consultants, who allegedly say that standing for principle is inconsistent with winning elections. He says that there are only 2 approaches available to conservatives, theirs or his. It's starting to sound like the Defund-Again debacle of a year ago. And as you might expect, this, too, is a false dichotomy. Reagan knew that brazenly drawing a line in the sand for the American people was the worst way to combat the liberal establishment. He explained to the readers of National Review that Goldwater lost in 1964 because Democrats had portrayed conservatives as advocating a radical departure from the status quo. Time now for the soft sell, he said, to prove our radicalism was an optical illusion. Reagan also knew that ideological purity is the enemy of principled victory. See, this is the point where all of you Tea Partiers who didn't heed my warning, this is, in fact, I just heard it, this is the point where your heads have just exploded. Let me repeat it again. Ronald Reagan knew. Ronald Reagan, 40th President of the United States, the Gipper, the godfather of the GOP, knew that ideological purity is the enemy of principled victory. Told you it was going to be a reality check, my Tea Party friends. In 1967, speaking to a conservative grassroots group, then Governor Reagan set out his vision for the GOP. Quote, "We cannot offer to individualists a narrow sectarian party in which we all must swear allegiance to prescribed commandments. Such a party can be highly disciplined, but it does not win elections. This kind of party soon disappears in a blaze of glorious defeat, and it never puts into practice its basic tenets, no matter how noble they may be." Reagan knew that victory can come only by assembling a coalition of people, not all of whom will agree on every topic. Senator Cruz is fond of quoting William Barrett Travis's famous letter from the Alamo. It ends with the stirring words, "Victory or death!" And what happened to the Alamo defenders? They died, and needlessly, as their position was neither strategic nor defensible. Fortunately for Texas, there was another, more sagacious leader, Sam Houston. Houston knew that victory was better than death. He gathered troops to his banner and kept them from seeking immediate revenge for the massacre at the Alamo. Patiently, he waited for the right moment to strike. 6 weeks after the Alamo fell, he found that moment, surprising the Mexican army at San Jacinto, and not San Jacinto, California, San Jacinto, Texas, so completely that the battle was over in 18 minutes. The inscription at the San Jacinto Monument describes both the battle and its consequences elegantly. The slaughter was appalling, victory complete, and Texas free. Conservatives who love liberty more than political death ought to forget the Alamo. And they ought to forget Ted Cruz. Far better to follow the words and deeds of prudent men of principle like Ronald Reagan and Sam Houston, who knew not just what it took to win, but knew that winning was all that matters. And the most likely incarnation of the next great communicator, my guy, my candidate I'm supporting in 2016, if there is a 2016 election, of course. Barack Obama doesn't just decree himself a lifetime term and cancel the 2016 election. May not even make it out of Wisconsin, ladies and gentlemen. A liberal DA's cynical use of Wisconsin's John Doe process may cost Scott Walker his second re-election. George Will wrote about this in his Washington Post column over the weekend. The early morning paramilitary-style raids on citizens' homes were conducted by law enforcement officers, sometimes wearing bulletproof vests and lugging battering rams, pounding on doors and issuing threats. Spouses were separated as the police seized computers, including those of children still in pajamas. Clothes drawers, including the children's, were ransacked. Cell phones were confiscated. And the citizens were told it would be a crime to tell anyone of the raids. Some raids were precursors of, rather than parts of, the nastiest episode of this unlovely political season. An episode that has occurred in an unlikely place. This attempted criminalization of politics in order to silence persons occupying just one portion of the political spectrum has happened in Wisconsin, which often has conducted robust political arguments with Midwestern civility. From the progressivism of Robert La Follette to the conservatism of Governor Scott Walker today, Wisconsin has been fertile soil for conviction politics. Today, the state senators are the very conservative Ron Johnson and the very liberal Tammy Baldwin. Now, however, Wisconsin, which to its chagrin produced Republican Senator Joe McCarthy, has been embarrassed by Milwaukee County's Democrat District Attorney John Chisholm. Talked about this quite a bit on the Hard Starboard Radio Network. Probably within the last month or two. Now, Mr. Chisholm has used Wisconsin's uniquely odious John Doe process to launch sweeping and virtually unsupervised investigations while imposing gag orders to prevent investigated persons from defending themselves or rebutting politically motivated leaks, which have occurred. According to several published reports, Chisholm told members of his staff subordinates that his wife, a teachers' union shop steward at her school, is anguished by her detestation of Walker's restrictions on government employees' unions' greed. So Chisholm considers it his duty to help defeat Scott Walker. In collaboration with Wisconsin's misbegotten Government Accountability Board, which exists to regulate political speech, Chisholm has misinterpreted Wisconsin campaign law in a way that looks willful. He's done so to justify a John Doe process that has searched for evidence of coordination between Walker's campaign and conservative issue advocacy groups. On October 14th, much too late in the campaign season to rescue the political participation rights of conservative groups, a federal judge affirmed what Chisholm surely has known all along. Since a U.S. Supreme Court ruling 38 years ago, the only coordination that is forbidden is between candidates and independent groups that go beyond issue advocacy to express advocacy, explicitly advocating the election or defeat of a particular candidate. But Chisholm's aim to have a chilling effect on conservative speech has been achieved by bombarding Walker supporters with raids and subpoenas. Instead of raising funds to disseminate their political speech, conservative individuals and groups, harassed and intimidated, have gone into a defensive crouch, raising little money and spending much money on defensive litigation. Liberal groups have not been targeted for their activities that are indistinguishable from those of their conservative counterparts. Such misbehavior takes a toll on something that already is in short supply: belief in government's legitimacy. The federal government's most intrusive and potentially punitive institution, the IRS, unquestionably worked for Barack Obama's re-election by suppressing activities of conservative groups. Would he have won if the government he heads had not impeded political participation by many opposition groups? We'll never know. Would the race between Walker and Democrat Mary Burke be as close as it is if a process susceptible to abuse had not been so flagrantly abused to silence groups on one side of Wisconsin's debate? Probably not. Gangster government. Michael Barone's description of using government machinery to punish political opponents and reward supporters has stained Wisconsin, illustrating this truth. The regulation of campaigns in the name of political hygiene, combating corruption or the appearance of it, inevitably involves bad laws and bad bureaucracy susceptible to abuse by very bad people, or in other words, liberals. Because of Chisholm's recklessness, the candidate he is trying to elect, Burke, can only win a tainted victory. And if she wins, she will govern with a taint of illegitimacy. But then what would that matter to her? They don't care if they have a taint of illegitimacy. Who's going to give them that taint? The media? They don't care how they win. All that matters to them is that they do. Power trumps legitimacy. Power trumps everything. If you understand nothing else about the left, understand that. Power trumps everything. It's better to get forgiveness than permission, and once you have power, you don't need forgiveness or permission. No known evidence demonstrates any complicity in Chisholm's scheme. But in a smarmy new ad, she exploits his manufactured atmosphere synthetic scandal in a manner best described as McCarthyite. Indeed, one probable purpose of Chisholm's antics was to generate content for anti-Walker ads. Wisconsin can repair its reputation by dismantling the John Doe process and disciplining those who have abused it. About one of them, this can be said. Having achieved political suppression by threatening criminal liability based on vague theories of coordination, Chisholm has inadvertently but powerfully made the case for deregulating politics. Of course, the other way they can do that? Real simple. Real simple, folks. Re-elect Scott Walker. Again. And as I've been saying for months now, a year even, there's one reason and one reason only. One overarching strategic reason why the Democrats are trying to destroy Scott Walker. Because they know that he has the best chance of being the next Ronald Reagan. They know that he will be unstoppable in 2016 if he gets reelected again as governor of Wisconsin. So that's why he's got to be destroyed. Will he be? We'll find out in a week. And you'll know, because we'll be back in 22 hours and 2 minutes for more of the Hard Starboard Radio Network at blogtalkradio.com/HSR Network, 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific. Join us.